This week has been very interesting for me because our youngest is sick. He's also teething and has decided to get 3 or 4 teeth in at the same time. And I know you can have those symptoms when you're teething as well. My 3-year-old is in preschool, understands what it means to be independent, to have friends, to be able to be successful at stuff, and wants to be his own person. And then I'm also trying to work within this weird tandem of my mother-in-law in town and her taking care of things and where do I fit in and finding rest at the same time. And then at work, my entire caseload is completely shifting. I got, I guess, a promotion, but a new job description in this process and some training and stuff like that. And this whole thing is bringing about change. And it's always interesting what this looks like, whether you are trying to figure out what to do with life or family or career or whatever else it is. How do you work well in this process? My work has applied greatly to how I look at things I do online, things I do with my family. And one of the big things in work is there's this thing called psychosocial stages of change. It's this thing that was developed over 100 years ago now by a guy named Erik Erikson. And the idea behind it is you go through these 8 stages in your life. And it's very dated because this was designed at the beginning of schooling and the beginning of the counseling career. And so some of the stuff has changed or has been culturally insensitive in this process. But the theory in and of itself holds up really, really well. It talks about the idea of when you're an infant, like my infant, you're dependent on everybody. If you want anything to happen, you have one option and one option only, and that's to cry. Are you hungry? You cry. Are you too cold? You cry. Did you wet or dirty your diaper? You cry. And so we as parents have to figure out and go through the whole routine of check the diaper, or the teething. Does he need Orajel or something like that? Do we need to give him a bottle? Is it time for it? And at that point, we're kind of out of luck. We got to figure out what's going on. And so we try to help with that process. He starts rubbing his eyes. That is an indication now for us if he wants to sleep. The Orajel does help. The sniffling, though, could be because of the teething, like I said. And then you get my 3-year-old. And my 3-year-old's in this next stage. And this next stage talks about the idea of being able to be a little bit more independent. Can you actually be self-sufficient? Or is there self-doubt within yourself? Or is there the idea of shaming yourself? And so with my youngest, he needs to develop trust with people. And that's what that whole stage is about, is you develop trust in this process. But whenever you get to the next level, you want to figure out, can I do things on my own? And he starts to figure out at this stage in life what he can and cannot control. So we say, okay, you need to finish your chicken nuggets before you get down. You need to pick up all your toys if you want to do this other thing that we want to do. And he needs to figure out how to do that. And then there's other things that he might not want to do, but he still needs to do himself. Sit in time out because he said something mean, pick up those toys even though it's time for bed. And he needs to figure out how to do that in that process. And what does he control and not control? And so he's starting to learn that I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And it's an interesting process of what that looks like. And so you're dealing with the frustrations from my infant, and how in the world are we going to be able to help him so that he stops crying? And at the same time, my oldest son, who is trying to figure out how to do these things on his own, it's an interesting process. And for me, it brings about some ideas of what do we have control over and what do we not have control over as parents, in our career, in our marriages, and everything else, including our relationship with God. See, for me, the process in all of this is, what do we have control over? Do you want to be effective at work? Lay off this thing. Do you want to be able to understand your faith? Read the Bible more, pray more, go to Bible studies, talk to your pastor. You have control over these things. The same thing with something like trying to be able to get higher impact at work with your social media. If you're a social media manager, you don't have control over how many people will follow you. You don't have control of how many people will like your stuff. The only thing you really have control over is, do you want to spend money on marketing? What kind of content are you going to post? And what are you actually going to do? Are you going to post 10 times a day? Are you going to post 1 time a day? Or are you actually going to have a website or blog or social media account at all? Same thing with ourselves as in our marriage. You want your marriage to get better? Oh, it's ended. They've done something terrible against me. It's completely and utterly unreconcilable. I don't believe in that personally. I will admit that if you have spent $10,000 on your wedding, then you probably should be willing to spend at least $10,000 to save your marriage. If you're willing to spend that much money just to start your marriage, can you spend that much money to save it? And so how much money are you willing to put into that process? And what can you own? Can you change the other person? Absolutely not. But are there things that you can do even when the other person was the one that had caused the problem? And maybe that's a sexless marriage. Maybe that's someone that had cheated on you. I don't know what it is. But are there things that you could do? Could you listen a little bit more? Could you actually care a little bit more? Could you give a little bit more of yourself to your partner? As parents, what do you control in this process? Can you tell your kids what to do? No. Can you be amazing examples for them? Yes. Do you have to give them a book and a Christmas present or a gift or whatever else every single time? No. Do you need to make their lives gluten-free? No. There's a lot of things that we can control with that. So there's also a lot of things that are outside of our control as far as influences. You can steer that ship really, really well, but a lot of their life is going to be outside of your control. And so what do? Have faith in what God is going to provide for you in this process? Are you going to make sure that you instill the godly manners that you have in yourself, the principles for this entire life that we live, so that they can be the best adults when they grow up? Absolutely. And there's one amazing thing about this entire counseling process that doesn't get discussed much in counseling because it's a spiritual principle, even though spirituality is a huge part of the counseling process. For me, I believe that God is in control of all things. And He allows us to make the decisions that we want. And He is also willing to impart miracles and people and other things in our life so that we do the best thing that we can. I'm thinking about my own career of trying to get into counseling, and my thought was, I'm going to be a computer engineer, and that's what I'm going to do. And I did everything I could to get to that point. I even graduated with a computer engineering degree and had a job lined up before I graduated. I did everything I could do so that God could then impart on me the youth ministry and ultimately helping those less fortunate in this process, people that don't have a voice, which is what youth ministry was all about, and what counseling at its very core is about, is empowering and equipping those people that don't have a voice or have lost it along the way or feel like they've never had it in the first place. That's where God had me going in this process. And He imparted that on me, and I know that He has that control to be able to do so. And for me to be able to submit to that control, for me, was absolutely humongous. And so I wonder what you guys have in your life. Is it some kind of depression or anxiety that's completely overwhelming? Do you feel like you can't parent anymore? Is your marriage just on the rocks completely and utterly and all the time to the point that it's unreconcilable? Is your business something that you feel like you can never manage? Whatever it is, my encouragement to you is, what is it that you do have control over? How does your faith impart in this process? And everything else that you don't have control over, don't worry about. Don't know what's going to happen next week? That's okay. Don't know how in the world you're going to pay for that next thing that you want? That's all right. Not sure how to parent in a really difficult situation? Just keep pushing through. Unsure of what's going to happen at work and don't know how to work through that next meeting? It's all right. Those things are outside of our control, and all we can do is to be present, to show up, and to do everything we can in this process. That's what we have in control. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in this. Is this something that you believe is true, or is this something that you kind of go against? I know there's this generational gap where you just got to work hard and push through it and do all these things, which there's some beautiful things in that. And then there's also some mistruths in that. Are you completely on board and yet not doing what you need to be doing in this process and actually short serving yourself and God in this process? Do you guys have any questions on this? I think that's the big one. So you guys comments down below. I gotta go back to a crying baby that's still teething, but I will catch you guys next time. Thanks.